Today, we're breaking down 8 players heading into the 2025 fantasy football season that are being way undervalued at their current ADPs. These are 8 players that you do not want to let your league mates know about heading into your upcoming fantasy drafts. Let's make sure we keep these players a hidden secret. Let's start the video off with Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets, currently going at an ADP of 32.1. And you guys know, if you've been following the channel this offseason, that I have talked a lot about Garrett Wilson, but I really think he is being slept on at his current overall ADP. This is kind of the perfect wide receiver 2 that you guys can grab for your fantasy rosters at the beginning of the 3rd round. If you're going with an aggressive strategy and getting 3 wide receivers right off the bat, I absolutely love Garrett Wilson as a wide receiver 3 for your fantasy rosters. And if you guys are going heavy running back to start, Garrett Wilson is an absolute steal, even as a wide receiver 1 going into the 2025 fantasy football season. I know other people have brought up a lot of these main points, but I just feel like I'm seeing way too much Garrett Wilson hate as the upcoming fantasy season approaches. But I want to talk about some of those main points, and that is, the comparison here to DJ Moore's overall season in 2023 with Justin Fields as the starting quarterback for the Chicago Bears, in which he finished as top 12 in total receptions, receiving yards, yards after the catch, total touchdowns amongst all wide receivers, including number 9 in fantasy points per game amongst all wide receivers at 16.9 fantasy points per game amongst all wide receivers, and overall finished as the wide receiver 5 in total PPR. He was also the number 1 wide receiver in 2023 in total route participation. And I think when we look at things, ultimately, we can make a very solid argument and solid case that that's the type of production we are going to get out of Garrett Wilson in 2025, because you look at that Bears roster in 2023, there weren't a lot of offensive weapons or wide receivers on that team as well. DJ Moore was the clear-cut wide receiver 1. We look at this Jets roster, Garrett Wilson is the clear-cut wide receiver 1. And if you were worried about, Justin Fields being this rushing quarterback that's not going to throw the football enough in 2023, that year that he supported a monster season for DJ Moore, Justin Fields finished with the 3rd most carries amongst all quarterbacks, the most carries per game at 9.5 rushing attempts per game, was 2nd in overall rushing yards amongst all quarterbacks, and 2nd in terms of rushing yards per game amongst all quarterbacks. And he still supported DJ Moore in terms of being an elite fantasy football wide receiver in 2023. On top of that, in terms of Garrett Wilson, he's coming off of his most productive season ever and his best fantasy season ever. Last year, amongst all wide receivers, he was number 4 in targets, number 5 in receptions, number 7 in red zone targets, number 11 in receiving yards, number 5 in total route wins. He was number 1 amongst all wide receivers in snap share. Why would that change? Especially the snap share portion in 2025. When we look at this roster and the makeup of it right now, he was also number 3 in total routes ran amongst all wide receivers. That type of volume on paper right now is not going away. Number 6 in total route participation as well amongst all wide receivers last year. So I think 110% the volume is going to be there for Garrett Wilson this year. Not worried in any way about, Justin Fields being exclusively a rushing quarterback who can't get it done through the air. Justin Fields was kept in a box in an Arthur Smith system on the Steelers last year. It's going to be very different. The Jets are going to let him loose. We're going to see, maybe some mistakes by Justin Fields, maybe some up and downs, but ultimately we're going to see him be able to play to his strengths and support Garrett Wilson as a true wide receiver 1. And I think that Garrett Wilson is being absolutely slept on at his current ADP. He is a player that I'm targeting left and right. I think you guys should also be targeting Garrett Wilson. And ultimately, I think he's a wide receiver that you guys should be keeping secret from your fellow league mates. Let's move to a running back that I have also been talking about all off season long, and that is Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks, currently sitting at an ADP of 45. 65.2 overall. I have seen, some drafts on Underdog, some mock drafts recently as well in Sleeper, where, Kenneth Walker is being a little bit more aggressively targeted, but he really hasn't changed overall in ADP for the most part throughout the past couple weeks in the off season. And you guys know like what my ultimate argument here is for Kenneth Walker if you guys have been following the channel this off season. And I'll go ahead and get it out of the way. I also like Zach Charbonnet at the running back position as one of the elite handcuffs that you guys can draft right now in fantasy football. I also think has a lot of good standalone value. But right now we kind of look in that tier of where Walker is going. Kind of got the end of the third round, right? Breece Hall bleeding into the fourth round, James Cook, Alvin Kamara, Kenneth Walker, Chuba Hubbard, James Conner, and I do feel like Walker, for a lot of people, is being valued after players like Breece Hall, James Cook, Alvin Kamara, but I think he should be right next to those players, and I honestly think you can make an argument that he has enough production stemming from last year, what we can expect this year, to be in that conversation closer to guys like Breece Hall, James Cook, and Alvin Kamara. If you guys watched my ranking video for my top 50 running backs going into 2025, you guys know that I have Walker right up there, and I think he is going to have an amazing 2025 fantasy football season. But let's talk about some of the reasons why. We look back to last year. Felt like a disappointment, I suppose, because he only played in 11 total games, but he had double-digit fantasy performances in 9 out of 11 of those games, was number 12 amongst all running backs in fantasy points per game, with 16.5 fantasy points per game, was number 6 in total expected fantasy points per game. And the big thing here is that you guys see me repeating throughout a lot of these videos this offseason when I talk about Walker, is he was number 11 in total routes ran amongst all running backs, 53 total targets, 46 receptions. And I think he's going to have a massive step forward in terms of what he can do in the receiving game, when we already saw quite a bit of a step forward in 2024 in terms of what he can do in the receiving game. And plus, a lot of his other like in-depth analytics were very good. Number 5 in juke rate, number 13 in evaded tackles last year, which will only help in that portion of the receiving game. But the big thing here is, right, Clint Kubiak's coming over from New Orleans as the new offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks, and he is one of the best overall offensive coordinators when it comes to the running back position. But ultimately, what we saw last year out of Alvin Kamara in that Saints offense is Kamara finished number 2 in receiving yards, number 2 in receptions, number 5 in fantasy points per game, number 1 amongst all running backs in expected fantasy points per game, number 1 in target share, and number 6 in routes ran. A monster season for Alvin Kamara last year, and ultimately we can expect that same type of production coming to Kenneth Walker in 2025. So right now, where he's sitting in mock drafts, where he's sitting in underdog drafts, I think he's an absolute smash selection that you guys need to start drafting more of. Consider him as a stronger RB2 for your fantasy teams. And if you're going heavy at wide receiver, 0 RB, this is the perfect running back to start your 2025 fantasy drafts off with. So I am all in on Kenneth Walker. I think you guys should be as well. But once again, don't let your league mates know that we're all in on Kenneth Walker in 2025. Moving to another wide receiver, let's talk about Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. A player, if you guys followed the channel last offseason, I was super high on Courtland Sutton. He was one of my most drafted wide receivers last offseason. And this is a player that I absolutely love going into 2025 as well. Last year, the ceiling wasn't always crazy high for Sutton, but once that offense started to get rolling with Bo Nix in his rookie season, I mean, Sutton was the focal point of that passing attack and really the only consistent option in that passing attack. Once again, ceiling wasn't super high, but he finished number 13 in total targets, number 17 in receptions, number 13 in receiving yards, also number 13 in total touchdowns, number 8 in red zone targets, number 10 in routes ran, number 12 in route participation, and ultimately finished as the wide receiver 15 in PPR scoring format, averaging 14.1 fantasy points per game. We looked at last year, the Broncos were 19th in total offense, just over 3,800 passing yards, which came out to 224 passing yards per game. I think those numbers are going to improve in Bo Nix's sophomore season. If you guys followed the channel during the season last year, I will go ahead and say we were like the first channel who were Bo Nix supporters when it came to fantasy football in 2024. You guys can go back and watch the early waiver wire videos and the start sit videos. I was pounding the table for you guys to pick up Bo Nix, start Bo Nix way earlier than other channels were. It was one of my things I got right last year, right? And I was, overall, Bo Nix had an incredible rookie season. He had 567 passing attempts, 376 completions, threw the football a ton. And like I said, just over 3,700 passing yards, 29 touchdowns to 12 picks. And Bo Nix did all that with 92 rushing attempts, 430 rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns. He was in the top 5 in terms of rushing attempts amongst all quarterbacks last year in 2024 and was still able to support the passing game. And once again, in his sophomore season, I think ultimately Bo Nix is going to be a better thrower of the football in his second year in the Sean Payton system. I think we're going to see a better, more fluent, more consistent passing game throughout the year. So I think Courtland Sutton's one of these kind of veteran wide receivers who's just being undervalued where he's being drafted right now. We look in fantasy drafts right now at an ADP of 50.2. And we're seeing Sutton kind of like the mid 4th round, sometimes bleeding into the beginning of the 5th round. It's an interesting kind of tier wide receivers. I would say it starts with Mike Evans, then Sutton, Metcalf, DJ Moore, kind of getting into that like Devonta Smith, Travis Hunter type area, right? And ultimately, out of that bunch, I think we can, maybe excluding Mike Evans, we can rely on Courtland Sutton being the most consistent option, who's in an offense that has a very high ceiling in 2025. Don't get me wrong, Mike Evans, extremely consistent, and I think that offense also very high ceiling in 2025. But yeah, ultimately, just another season where I feel like Courtland Sutton, once again, might not have the highest ceiling overall, but this is a player that you're going to be able to plug in to your fantasy lineups 2025 and never have to worry about. He's a great option in PPR. So when you guys are coming around mid 4th round, getting into the end of the 4th round, beginning of the 5th round, Courtland Sutton's there, especially in full PPR formats. I'm smashing the draft button every single time. I think you guys should as well. And once again, don't let your league mates smash the draft button on Courtland Sutton before you do. All right, next up, we're talking about DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears, currently going at an ADP of 76.3 on the Sleeper app. And yeah, once again, I will admit I've talked a lot about DeAndre Swift this offseason, and I always seem to be one of the only DeAndre Swift truthers out there, but I do actually feel like this offseason there are a lot more, people in the fantasy community optimistic about DeAndre Swift, but I feel like ultimately his ADP has not moved up that much over the past couple of weeks. Like I said, still sitting at ADP of 76.3 on the Sleeper app and is not that far off on Underdog as well. And I'll just go ahead and lay out my argument here. He still has been incredibly consistent over the last 3 years, averaging 12.5 or more fantasy points per game in 3 straight seasons. It's been a top 25 fantasy football running back in 3 straight seasons. So the floor is certainly there for DeAndre Swift at worst. And where you're getting him, a lot of times you're drafting him as an RB3 or bench running back. And I think he's just going to be a very good, consistent option at worst. But I think ultimately the ceiling is still there for DeAndre Swift. Last year amongst all running backs, number 10 in carries, number 10 in receiving yards, number 14 in receptions, number 8 in routes ran. So we would like to see better numbers. Ultimately, in terms of the opportunity that DeAndre Swift had last year, we would like to see more production out of it at the end of the day. But I think that's one of the key things here is that I think once again, even in a new system with Ben Johnson as a head coach, Declan Doyle as the offensive coordinator, I still think that opportunity is going to be there for DeAndre Swift. And I think there's a lot of reason to believe that he'll be more efficient in 2025. Adding to that, there's no battle in terms of who's going to be the RB1 for the Chicago Bears. There's nobody on this roster that concerns me whatsoever. It's DeAndre Swift. He's going to be utilized in this Ben Johnson system 110%, extremely heavily. We look back to 2024 alone under a Ben Johnson system. Overall, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs combined for 32 total touchdowns. So listen, even if Roschon Johnson or whoever you believe in here is going to come in and vulture some touchdowns here and there, there's certainly still a lot of production left over for DeAndre Swift. Am I saying the Bears of 2025 are going to be the Lions of 2024? No, but ultimately, once again, that should give you guys, confidence in a baseline, very good floor, but also some hope for a ceiling. Then the other major plus here is that this offensive line has gone through major improvements, both through free agency and the past 2 NFL drafts as well. And a lot of the guys that they brought in specifically are good in terms of run blocking, not just pass protecting, especially when we look at Drew Dahlman coming from the Falcons, one of the best, literally the best overall center who's available in free agency this past year. So I like where the Bears are headed. Better offensive system this year. Caleb Williams is going to be better in his sophomore season. Got a lot of excitement around the Bears. A lot of belief in guys like Colson Loveland, Roma Dunze, and their young careers. Caleb Williams taking a step forward, even Luther Burden for some people. But DeAndre Swift keeps getting left out, and as does DJ Moore, who I do think is perfectly fine where he's going in drafts. But DeAndre Swift is that guy that I'm telling you guys, I really think is going to have a very solid 2025 fantasy football season. Once again, the floor is safe. You're drafting him as an RB3 right now or a bench running back. Make sure you guys are smashing the draft button on DeAndre Swift. And once again, let's not let your league mates smash that drop button before you do. Next up, let's take a look at George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys, moving over from the Pittsburgh Steelers to the Cowboys via trade. And George Pickens is a player that I've gone a little bit back and forth on throughout the offseason. I'll let you guys know that I am all the way in on George Pickens, currently going at an ADP of 60.8 on Sleeper. So you do have to kind of grab them like mid-fifth round. And there are other names that I really like in that range at wide receiver, like Devonta Smith, Jamison Williams, Xavier Worthy, Tet McMillan, and even some guys in the 6th round like Flowers, Addison, Godwin, Ridley that I like a lot as well. But I think Pickens is a player that you guys should start to get some exposure to. I think he's got a lot of upside going into 2025. And we look overall in terms of like what Pickens has done over his first 3 years in the league, there's really not a lot of good statistics to point to ultimately, but I think the biggest issue here is the system he was in, the quarterbacks that he had to play with, right? We look over the last 3 years, the Pittsburgh Steelers have not been good in terms of their passing offense whatsoever. They have not had more than 3,600 passing yards in any of the 3 seasons that Pickens has played, and even under 3,500 passing yards in 2023 as well. They threw for 12 passing touchdowns in 2022, Pickens' rookie season, 13 in his sophomore season, and then 21 last year, mainly due to Russell Wilson. And even then, once again, we start to break down George Pickens on a yearly basis. The production has just not truly been there from a fantasy perspective. Wide receiver 39, his rookie season, wide receiver 30, 2023, wide receiver 42 last year, did miss 3 games last year, played in full 17 games his first 2 years in the season. And once again, there's not like a lot of deep analytics here to point to or anything, but what we can look at is, the opportunity that this Dallas passing attack will give him with a healthy Dak Prescott in 2025. We go back to 2023, it's really easy to forget that the Cowboys were number 5 in total offense with over 4,600 passing yards. They were second in the league in 2023 in total passing yards, and they finished with 36 passing touchdowns as well. There's no reason to believe when we look at this makeup of the Dallas Cowboys that we're not going to get a similar type of season, barring any major injuries to any of the major offensive players here, right? The offensive line is ranked very low going into this season, 23rd overall on PFF, and they're trying to replace Zach Martin with rookie first rounder Tyler Booker. They've also got Cooper Beebe on this team. Tyler Guyton, the left tackle they drafted the previous season, did not have a very good rookie season last year, so they still have some issues there. And that of course can impact this team offensively through the air negatively, but also it's probably going to put them in a position where they need to throw the football a little bit more, right? Or at least are in situations where maybe it's more difficult to run the football. And we don't really need to talk about this Dallas Cowboys running back room. It's definitely not pristine on paper right now, right? And on top of that, the defense struggled last year. They had a lot of injuries. I'm actually expecting some positive regression for the defense, but ultimately, the makeup of this team reminds me in a sense of the Cincinnati Bengals, where the offensive line is not great. The defense is at least trending down. And this is a situation where got a solid quarterback in Dak Prescott. Say what you want. I know we have Dak Prescott haters out here, but once again, you go back to 2023 and break down some of those metrics on Dak Prescott in terms of what he did in the passing game, what he did in fantasy as a whole. And he was an absolute stud, and overall finished in terms of fantasy points per game as the quarterback for that year. And we'll talk a little bit more about Dak Prescott in 2023 in a couple moments here, but ultimately, you can say what you want about Prescott and whatever, but he's a great fantasy quarterback when healthy. He was the quarterback 3 in 2023 as well. So you can say what you want there. And I think ultimately, once again, this is a kind of a stark comparison to the Bengals where we got CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, kind of like a Chase, and T. Higgins loosely there, Burrow, Prescott, poor offensive line. I'm expecting a little bit of a better defensive play than last year, but still not a great defense on paper. So yeah, I'm in on George Pickens. I think the upside is absolutely there. And I think he's in a situation now, not, held back by an Arthur Smith offense or poor quarterback play, where he's going to be able to play to his strengths. And I know some people making the argument like CeeDee Lamb's here, like, okay, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. I mean, these lists go on and on in terms of wide receiver ones. On teams that have wide receiver 2s, and the wide receiver 2s are still productive. And I actually think when you look at George Pickens, I think he'll be able to play more to his strengths in terms of having CeeDee Lamb on the field and that defensive pressure going to CeeDee Lamb at the end of the day. So I love George Pickens at his current ADP. I'm starting to take more shots on him. I love him as a wide receiver 2 or 3. Kind of prefer him as a wide receiver 3, but in terms of a flex option, the upside is certainly there. This Dallas Cowboys offense is going to look very different in 2025 overall. I said we're going to talk about Dak Prescott as well, because I think he's another player that you guys need to keep secret from your league mates. He is going very late in fantasy drafts right now, and in single quarterback redraft formats, which is what a lot of us are going to be going into just in a month or two in terms of our drafts. I think Dak Prescott's an absolute steal at an ADP of 124.2. I also love him as, if you're going to go late round quarterback, take 2 guys. Take a Prescott and a Brock Purdy, Prescott and a J.J. McCarthy, Prescott and a Justin Fields, Prescott and a Kyler Murray, whatever it's going to be, all those combinations. Prescott is the perfect player to take a quote-unquote risk on, but I don't really think you're taking a risk, and I wouldn't even be that upset if I came out of my draft with just Dak Prescott, that I'm going to play the waivers maybe if, I want some additional stability at the quarterback position, because there will be some, players who are out there on the waivers, I still think, and single quarterback formats that still have a lot of value. But we go back to 2023, right? Which we just talked about a little bit. Dak Prescott was number 1 amongst all quarterbacks in red zone attempts. You look at everything here, all very good. Number 3 in passing yards, number 1 in passing touchdowns, the most passing touchdowns of any quarterback in 2023. And he can keep going down the list here, in terms of efficiency and all of player profiles, major rankings and passing efficiency. He ranked top, I'm looking at it right now, top 8 in everything except receiver target separation, which is not an issue of his, and then product premium, whatever that is. But yards per attempt, adjusted yards per attempt, air yards per attempt, best ball points added, fantasy points per drop back, fantasy points per game, expected fantasy points per game, clean pocket completion percentage, red zone completion percentage, play action completion percentage, pressured completion percentage, deep ball completion percentage, true completion percentage, accuracy rating, true passer rating, QBR, everything. He absolutely balled out in 2023. Sorry, I know there's a lot of random stuff I just read, but the metrics in terms of efficiency were absolutely great for Dak Prescott. And I think, once again, while things were a little bit sketchy looking beginning of last season in terms of Prescott in this offense, I think they're going to get back to that passing game being the vocal point of this offense. It'll be a lot more fluent this year. I like both of the options in CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb is the obvious one there, and we just talked about George Pickens. And ultimately, we can absolutely expect the Cowboys to be a pass-first offense. They were 17th in total offense last year, and you break it down, they still had over 4,000 passing yards and just barely over 1,700 rushing yards, with Cooper Rush as the primary quarterback for majority of the season for the Cowboys. They are still a pass-first offense. Don't forget, Cooper Rush was a streaming option at times last year at quarterback. So ultimately, we know what this is going to look like. I just broke it down a bit when talking about George Pickens, my expectations for this offense in 2025. was the quarterback 3 in fantasy football in 2023, and he doesn't even need to reach that level. And I think it could be kind of difficult too, right? Especially when we break down some of those metrics. You guys can go on Player Profiler and switch to 2023 and look at them. Like I said, everything is amazing. And once again, they did play some poor teams that year and some poor defenses. But once again, I think Prescott can easily finish as a top 10, top 12 fantasy quarterback in 2025 as long as he's fully healthy. CeeDee Lamb, Pickens, Jake Ferguson are healthy. And honestly, I know it's crazy. Side note here, I think Javonte Williams can actually have some sort of production in this offense, even if the offensive line, the running back room doesn't look great on paper. And once again, I don't expect this defense to be super elite or anything, so I think they're going to be in a lot of positions where they need to throw the football. So Dak Prescott, late round quarterback that you guys absolutely need to target as we approach 2025. All right, let's move to the tight end position for a moment here, and let's talk about Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. And this is a player, once again, that I think is going way too late in fantasy draft, sitting at an ADP of 81.4 on the Sleeper app. You look at the range of tight ends he is going in, it's not awful here, but we have TJ Hawkinson, Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Evan Ingram, David Njoku, and to a degree, Jonnu Smith, kind of in this tier of like late 7th round tight ends who can bleed into the 10th round. And right now, I mean, the tight end position in terms of ADP is a little bit all over the place. It will depend on like the specific draft you do and who you're drafting with, but still, he's being drafted way too late for me in terms of where he's going in mock drafts right now. And ultimately, listen, Mark Andrews' season last year was a little bit wishy-washy, I guess you can say. I think ultimately, a lot of people's issues is, I mean, he did finish as he tight end 6, but he had 11 touchdowns, right? And, you know, he played through 17 games last year. So when you start to break down some of the advanced metrics here, like in terms of opportunity and what he did, right, a lot of that fantasy value came from the 11 touchdowns scored. He had the most touchdowns scored amongst all tight ends last year, but only finished as the tight end 7 in fantasy points per game with 11.1 fantasy points per game. But that's part of my argument here. Like, I think that Mark Andrews is a really safe tight end where he's going in fantasy drafts right now. You get a really good floor with Andrews. And ultimately, you know, we look last year, right? 69 targets for Mark Andrews. And then we look at Isaiah Likely, who's like kind of the elephant in the room when you bring up Mark Andrews, 58 targets. So I still think there's plenty of volume here to go around for both tight ends. Ultimately, in terms of efficiency, Mark Andrews was still very efficient to a degree. Yards per catch, 12.2 yards per catch. Because a lot of people like to point out, you know, Isaiah Likely, 42 receptions, 477 receiving yards, 11.3 yards per catch is, you know, pretty dang efficient. But when you start to break down the advanced analytics, once again, they're not really like that big in terms of separation. And ultimately, I mean, Likely had a great season as a tight end too and scored 6 receiving touchdowns, but the consistency was really there for Andrews over Likely. And I think there's kind of this weird recency bias with Mark Andrews and the drop pass against Buffalo in the playoffs, but what does that have to do with fantasy football? We're concerned with weeks 1 through week 17. There's like this bad stigma around Andrews. He's in the final year of his contract, hasn't been, you know, offered an extension. And like Isaiah Likely is the younger piece. He was coming off of a like breakout season, didn't drop a, you know, game time pass against Buffalo in the playoffs or whatever. But, you know, the Ravens have given no indication themselves that they're going to move on from Mark Andrews, trade him, anything like that. I know there were trade rumors. Hasn't happened. And ultimately, when we look at Lamar Jackson in terms of, you know, his targets to the tight end position over the past couple years, he has been one of the top 3 quarterbacks in terms of targeting the tight end position when all quarterbacks are, you know, lumped together. And obviously that has a lot to do with Mark Andrews. He's been the recipient of almost all of those targets and receptions. And I just don't think that's going to change because once again, on paper, this Ravens offense is essentially no different than last year. They added DeAndre Hopkins as a wide receiver 3 behind Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. And we still got Derrick Henry, Justice Hill at running back, Lamar at quarterback. And then we got Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, right? And I just don't think that is going to change for Mark Andrews. And if this is a player who's going to try and extend his career, get another contract with a different team, or maybe sign like a veteran-friendly deal with the Ravens, he's still going to put everything out there on the field in 2025. And I always like to take bets on players in contract seasons for that very reason. So I'm all in on Mark Andrews at his current ADP. I think he's being absolutely undervalued. And just don't forget, this has been the tight end 5 or better in every season in fantasy football since 2019, except for 2023, where he played in 10 games and he was still a top 15 tight end in 2023. So for me, Mark Andrews, a steal at his ADP. I found myself coming out of a lot of mock drafts and underdog drafts with Mark Andrews on my roster. Once again, don't let your league mates know about this. Start drafting Mark Andrews a little bit more aggressively. Last player that I think you absolutely need to keep as a secret away from your fellow league mates is going to be Jakobi Meyers of the Las Vegas Raiders, another player that, once again, I have talked a lot about this off season, and this is one of my favorite late round wide receivers to target, going at an ADP of 83.7 on the sleeper app. So he's going like in the 7th round around guys like Jerry Jeudy, Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, Khalil Shakir, Jawan Jennings, Jaden Reed, and ultimately I think he's being really undervalued. This is like the perfect flex option for you guys in full PPR. Finished as the wide receiver 20 in fantasy points per game last year, and ultimately finished as the wide receiver 19 last year. Has been a top 30 wide receiver every year since 2021, which is like not outstanding, but we're in much later rounds right now. He's not being necessarily drafted like that. Has been a top 25 fantasy football wide receiver in 2 straight seasons. And I'll point out all the same arguments I've made all off season long. He's getting a massive quarterback upgrade going from Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell to Geno Smith, who's going to provide a lot of stability to this offense. And even like you look at the last year with those quarterbacks, like Myers was productive, Brock Bowers was productive. Bowers had 153 targets. And that's kind of another elephant in the room is like Brock Bowers is the wide receiver 1 here, even though he's the tight end. That's fine. If he's the number 1 receiving option, he still had 153 targets last year, and Myers finished with 129 targets. I do like rookie Jack Bech. I think rookie Donta Thornton's interesting. Maybe there's still some room for Trey Tucker to make some plays on this team, but Jakobi Meyers is locked in as the wide receiver 1 on this team, and primarily over his career, he has played in the slot. Jackson Smith and Jigba, number 1 last year in total slot snaps ran amongst all wide receivers. And this has been another one of my arguments is, all this hype around Jackson Smith and Jigba, especially in, Dynasty for good reason and all that. That productivity came from Geno Smith at the quarterback position. And now we're moving into, an offense where Jakobi Meyers is essentially going to be in that same exact role. Jackson Smith and Jigba, number 6 in total routes ran last year, number 11 amongst all wide receivers in route participation, number 12 in total targets, number 7 in receptions, number 10 in receiving yards. We know that Jackson Smith and Jigba coming off a great season. And I'm not necessarily saying that, Jakobi Meyers is going to be at that level of productivity, but he can certainly get close. And once again, this is a player that you look at like the, advanced metrics aren't anything crazy when we look at Myers, but once again, he's tied to bad quarterback play, so it doesn't make me panic whatsoever. Geno Smith going to be a huge upgrade here. There will be more volume to the run game for the Raiders this year. This has been something I've talked about in terms of concerns to a degree for Brock Bowers as well. And we're definitely going to see a lot of touches to Ashton Genty, but there's still going to be plenty to go around in terms of the receiving game. And Jakobi Meyers is locked in as the true wide receiver 1 on the Raiders. Huge upgrade at quarterback. This offense should be better in general as well. Loose comparison here, but maybe you could look at a player like Terry McLaurin, who kind of consistently played with poor quarterback play. And over the past couple seasons, excluding, early on when Tom Brady was the starting quarterback for Jakobi Meyers, we've seen him play with poor quarterback play. And I think that's going to be a big difference for Myers in 2025. So make sure you guys are taking some shots on him. He's a great flex player, very safe floor. Reason to believe the ceiling will be higher, and absolutely a player that you should be keeping hidden from your fellow league mates. And that'll do it for today's video. There are 8 players that I think you guys need to keep secret from your fellow league mates as we approach the 2025 fantasy football season. If you guys are new to the channel, this is all we do here all year long. Free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe on the way out. You guys can also check out all of our videos on the playlist that'll pop up on the screen any moment to help you guys get prepared for the upcoming 2025 fantasy football season. We're putting out daily fantasy football content content to help you guys dominate the 2025 fantasy football season. We'll be putting out daily free fantasy football content every single day of the 2025 fantasy football season as well. If you guys have any fantasy football questions whatsoever, please drop them in the comments down below. I'll get back to you guys as soon as I can. And with that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.